Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the X Podcast. I'm Brenda Rigney, your host today. I'm also your dream business coach, and I'm really excited to have on today Lisa Woodruff. Lisa, let's say hi first.
Hi, Brenda.
I always hear other people's podcasts, and they always give these long introductions, and it's like the person's waiting to say hi. So I just want to say hi, acknowledge you, and let everyone know that you're the founder and CEO of Organize 365. Mm-hmm. So you work with people, and I love this, helping people get their homes organized so they can get out and go do the things that they love, the things that they're passionate about. And, obviously create more of that state, that space, that time in their life to be able to do those things. What is something that's really hot right now that you're working on with your clients?
I love that you say that you gave our mission statement. And because this is the Gen X podcast, we are all in our late 40s, 50s. And what I've realized recently is that I literally have another 50 years to live. When we were kids, you remember they had that insurance commercial where they had you take the dog and put it, and put how your oldest living family member was, and people would start to put them up to the 100s. Yeah, people in my family have lived to be 100. That was in the 80s. Well, now, think about it. We're only in our 50s. Mm-hmm. We're probably going to live to our hundreds. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but a lot of us are. Yeah. And if that's the case, we literally have half of our lives left. Yes. So the thing I'm most excited about is I'm sending myself back to school. I'm getting a PhD because I'm my company is only 12 years old. I'm going to work until I'm 80 because that's how old Martha Stewart is. She's still working. So that's another 28 years to work. Might as well get a PhD.
Very cool. So that's really hot and exciting. And that's going to be a huge gift for your clients because obviously you're digging in deeper into things that you can do to help them out in their lives and everything that they're doing and contributing. So you just brought up the topic, the podcast is all about the X, the sandwich generation. And so working with midlife people that have got things going on in your life. And, if you're wondering, hey, am I midlife? Do I fit into this category? A quick quiz for you is do you have children still at home or emerging adults? That's me. Are you caring for elders? That could be parents, grandparents, that favorite aunt of yours. And caring may not necessarily look like they're fully immersed in your household. It could be just running errands, helping them set up their, still their VCR player or something.
Yes.
Because their baby boomers probably still have a VCR player or a DVD player in their house. So that's, I think, just a quick quiz. What are some other things when you're thinking about your clients that are in that sort of midlife group? What are some things that are sort of coming up for them right now that are causing early signs of stress or burnout that you're helping them out with?
I think, especially now getting my PhD, I'm steeped in academia and reading all these journal articles. And basically, anyone over the age of 40 is not in any of the articles or any of the studies. Menopause is not studied at all. It's starting to be studied. But also, what happens in your household when you're done raising children? I've read hundreds of studies, and there are thousands of housework studies. And the majority of them will restrict their sample size to married couples with children still living at home. Well, it's not me anymore, so I'm not in the study. Also, only 40% of people have kids. So this 60% that you're not even accounting for, you're not accounting for single parents. So there's a lot of family types that are not in academia. And so when you ask that question, I think a lot of us, once we get into our 40s, and then for sure, once you get in your 50s, it's you got smacked in the head with a frying pan and nobody told you anything that was going to happen after the age of 40. Right. And in your 40s, you're still, struggling. But by the time you're 50, you've got some time on your hands. You're whoa, wait a minute. How come nobody talked about settling people's estates or, having to be someone's power of healthcare or having to downsize your parents' house, downsize your own house, switch jobs? How do you get healthcare between 50 and 65? Why is none of this being talked about anywhere? And why is it such a surprise? Nothing else was a surprise up until 40, but now everything's woo, here's this thing. Surprise.
Yeah.
And no resources to handle it.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because obviously industry goes to academia too to get all those stats to determine, hey, you know what, there's this trend happening right now. People over 40 need this. And so we should create this product or service for them. But if academia isn't even doing that research and those groups that you just mentioned, I fall into probably a couple of those for sure, just right off the top. then, those products and services aren't necessarily available for me. So I got to do the work then as the consumer or the person that falls into that group that has that need. Like, it should just be readily available at my fingertips. I thought that was the weirdest thing when you brought up perimenopause too. Like, why doesn't every medical professional, my birth date? We know now, through medical research that women go through perimenopause as early as like 35, 38.
Yep.
So why didn't I get a birthday card from my doctor saying, welcome to perimenopause? Call me if you have questions.
I mean, I have so many thoughts on this, but I'm not an expert in this. There are a couple of people I follow that I really like. We could go on a huge rabbit trail on that, but yeah. And even in my PhD classes, I was in developmental psychology and we were studying adults. And I was like, what are the adult life stages? I'd studied Erickson as a teacher and all of that. Mm-hmm. And the professor said, there aren't any. And I'm like, and she was in her 30s with young kids. And I was like, well, what about, like menopause? And she's like, no, that's not a stage. And I'm sitting here going, it is the inverse of puberty. It's definitely a developmental stage. It's not a developmental stage in academia. I was like, just mind blown. And the thing is, you don't even think about it as being a stage until you're in your 50s and you've experienced it. And they're like, right. Whoa, where's all this research? However, you're on your own path at that point. Yeah. And you're doing something at that point that you don't want to divert to now researching menopause, let's say. Same thing happens when you become power of healthcare, power of attorney, all these things. Like, we are all going to do these things, but by the time you experience them, it wasn't on your radar. And now, do you want to relive your parents' estate so you can make it easier for someone else? No, you're just relieved that you finished it.
So that's one of the things before we press record, we were talking about, like, there's this storm that's sort of coming. And like, just to give some context to our listeners, we were talking about the fact that, depending on where you are in your life, where we fall into some of those groups, but let's just say if you're kind of like the person, you're a midlife woman right now that has raised children, maybe you've been you've been married. Let's just say that if that's kind of like the group that we're sort of talking about, that where there is research on a lot of things. But you could be divorced. You could be going through a separation. Your kids may be moving out of the house. But guess what's going to be coming around the corner that we haven't necessarily read or heard that much about? They're not talking about right now. And that's all the baby boomers, one of the largest, population groups on the planet, next to Gen Z, which are coming up behind us. But baby boomers that are not necessarily going into nursing homes yet. They're still like in their homes, but they need us. Talk to us a little bit about this storm that's coming that no one is talking about.
Yeah. So an interesting statistic, and I don't remember where I heard it, was years ago. But Gen X, as a generation, we were only the largest population in the workforce for 3.5 years. It was baby boomers, us for 3.5 years, and then millennials. Like, we are like a pittance of people. And we all have parents. A lot of them got divorced. So a lot of us have 4 parents instead of 2.
Right.
We also are a very tiny generation, meaning we didn't have a lot of siblings. It's just us or 1 or 2 siblings. And then our parents got divorced. So literally there are more parents for us to take care of than there are us. And then we had children or didn't have children, whatever. So when you think about who's going to take care of the baby boomers, if you're a Gen Xer and your parents are baby boomers and you're married to a Gen Xer, you may be settling 8 estates. Because if both of your parents got divorced and remarried, that's 8 estates.
Yeah, great.
Especially if you're the oldest Gen Xer in that family.
So if you don't have a degree right now or some type of training on how to be an executor of an estate, like you need to.
First of all, there is no training on that. And it's worse than that, Brenda. It's worse than that. Because I have interviewed tax attorneys, estate attorneys, CPAs, and wealth managers, all 4, who are the people that manage all of your money so that you have a will, so that you have all, they don't have a booklet for you being an estate attorney either. And here's the thing, you must have a will. You need to have a will. Otherwise, all your money goes to the state. That's terrible. So you need a estate attorney. You need to have a financial planner because you want to have a 401k, right? You want to have some kind of assets. If you have assets, you need to have a wealth manager. You need to have a CPA because you're going to have to do the taxes. And a tax attorney would be if you own a business. However, when someone passes, the things that those 4 professionals help you do, you'll have done in a couple of weeks. The work of settling an estate takes 18 months and it's none of those things and no one's talking about it and there's no system for it. It's getting out of the Verizon contract, which is the hardest thing it took me to get out of for my dad. It is cleaning out and selling your family home. It is getting out of your father's car lease. It is dealing with his business owner. So when I became Power of Healthcare and also then had to settle my dad's estate, my parents had gotten divorced a few years prior. He owned a company. There were problems everywhere. And so when he passed away, he had a trust, and his trustee and his successor trustee resigned within an hour of his passing. So then I had a trust with no trustee. Let me just tell you how easy that is. You have to pay all of the bills for the household while you still own the house, and you can't list a house immediately. And if everything's digital, it's worse for you than if it's not. Let me say that again. If everything's digital, it is worse for you than if it's not, because at least if it's not digital, within a month of collecting the mail, you have an idea of what you need to be paying.
Right.
But if you don't have mail coming in, how do you know?
And if you don't have
never got into my husband's computer or my father's computer. Never got into it.
If you don't have passwords or any of those things, right? Like shutting down Facebook, accounts, whatever those things are, right? It's just
so think of all the administration of your life. That has to happen for the person who has passed until you have sold all of their assets, dispersed all of their assets, and filed their last tax return. It usually takes about 18 months. And the big things, the big money things, all happen within 6 weeks, are no big deal. But you are literally running another household for someone who has passed and doing the funeral and all of that. And that happens in days. Like it's so much, and it blindsides every single person who ever experienced it. I remember going online and Googling, where's the book for this? I wanted like a binder that I could fill out. It did not exist.
So if you're listening to this right now and you're like holding onto your table or, no. The phone is starting to shake in your hand as you're listening to this, or you're about to drive off the road if you're listening to a podcast on the road.
Right.
Hey, pull over, take a deep breath. Right. And what are some of the things that you would suggest?
So pretty much it is going to be women who are going to do most of this. Men will do all the big things I told you about, the big money things. But the finding all the bills and going through that, it's going to fall usually to a woman, and usually the one that lives closest to the house that's going to be settled. Right. And your siblings will be supportive, as in like they might send a little bit of money or they might show up a couple of weekends, but usually it's going to fall, the brunt of it is going to fall on one person.
Right.
And so I created some binders. I have a financial binder, which allows you to be power of attorney and then ultimately settle an estate. And our medical binder is for power of healthcare, because that's what I needed when I had to do all these things while my kids were sick, while I lived 4 hours away from home. Like, there are a lot of things I've experienced in my adulthood, menopause, that I am not going to become an expert in and help other people through. But this, every single one of us is going to settle at least one estate. Every single one of us. And I've talked to some big box retailers about putting our financial binder in their stores, and they said, we don't want to be associated with death. And I'm like, this is like, how are we going to get this information?
It's going to happen. Like,
yes.
Like everyone that comes into your retail store is going to die. Like,
yeah. And we don't want to think about that. And if you can back up a little bit, what we're really encouraging baby boomers specifically to do is that we know you don't want to tell us about your medical and financial information. Just get it out of your head and off of the computer and into a binder, so that when the time comes that we need to help you and support you and advocate for you, it's in a binder. We can grab it and we can go to the proper professionals, and we have the information that we need, instead of saying, oh, well, my mom, my dad never told me that information. Like, let's go to healthcare for a minute. So everybody gets sick. Like, everybody gets sick. Sometimes you just get the flu. Sometimes it's worse than that. My sister, who's younger than me, so she's in her 40s, she ended up in the ER with a terrible migraine and vertigo and all these things going on. And I'm 4 hours away, and I didn't want to step on her toes, and I didn't want to, pry. And by the time she got out of the hospital a week later, she came on my podcast and she's like, Lisa, I wish you would have. Like, your power of attorney, you can talk to whoever you want. Like, I don't even know medical stuff. You know medical stuff better than I do. Like, our parents aren't going to, my dad's gone and my mom's not going to advocate for anything in a medical society. So she's like, you're my person. But I didn't feel like I had permission to drive. I would have driven up there, talked to the doctors, made a plan, and been like, Emily, this is what we're doing. And she would have done it. But I didn't know that she wanted me to do that. Like, we need to have permission from people to be able to step in on their behalf and advocate for them. And often by the time you need that person, you haven't written down your information and you haven't let that person know that you trust them to do this. Like, even if you have a will, did you tell the person who's your executor that they're your executor? Like, maybe not.
Maybe not. And I loved, like, I want to go back and underline one of the things that you said there is like, who's your person? So, and oftentimes we may, go, default to a spouse or a parent or someone like that to just by natural, like sort of line of succession to nominate them. But I think the reality is that this person that you're going to select to help have your back on these things needs to be someone that is also self-organized, that doesn't mind stepping into that role. And so like going out there and asking, it's kind of like when you're looking for guardianship for your children, right? It's like not everyone, not the great aunt that's in their 90s is going to be the best guardian for your children that might be like 5 years old. So it's like, even when I was thinking about when we were putting together our will and doing all of our estate planning, I was like, yeah, who would be the best? Like, I was like, yeah, like my sister-in-law, Kristen, like my kids would love to live with Kristen. And, she's cool. She's a cool mom. She does all these things. Yes, she's a ways away, but she would like provide like a nurturing home for her. And that's all it like sort of mattered to me. Same thing, I think, for, finding that executor that can be that power of attorney for you. The other thing that I've learned about too, is it's not just the power of attorney, but also someone that can sign off on the health requirements, right? So the power of attorney is good for like shutting down phones or, taking over payments of bills and stuff like that. But you need that healthcare person to say, okay, they know what your wishes are. Do you want to be, if you are in like a really serious, like obviously health situation, they know what you want to do as far as continuation of life or procedures or those type of things. Right. So,
and we're talking a lot about our parents, but I think the thing that's really hit me a lot in the last year, my, mother-in-law has fallen and broken her ankles. She broke her pelvis like 5 years ago. My father-in-law is extremely healthy and fit and still working at the age of 82, but we're noticing that he's slowing down a little bit. And I'm starting to realize that, not only are we going to need to support and care for our parents, but just like you said, they're still listed on my will as the executor of the will. That's not going to be the case.
No,
I need to switch that to a sibling. So in the case of my sister, she never married, never had children. So I am my sister's person because she doesn't have another person. A lot of my friends have gotten divorced. So it used to be that it was their spouse that was on their list. It's no longer going to be their spouse. And you don't go to your parents anymore. Now you're going to your siblings. Sometimes you're going to your cousins because, again, this is a unique to Gen X situation. We don't have a lot of siblings. And a lot of us didn't get married.
Or
and
now
so
you're also saying like we also have a lot of children, right? Like I have 2 children. That's one of the things that I'm also thinking about. Do I want my children as being executors? Like if something happens to me, I'm either sick, I'm in the hospital, I've passed away, they're going to be sad. They're going to be upset. They're going to be grieving. Do I also want to put this burden of like also be my executor, like go through all this administration? Or would it be better? Like, so I ended up having my cousin who's a CPA be my executor. I used to have her mom, who was my aunt. She's now retired. But now I've asked her daughter, my cousin, to be it because I'm like, I just want my kids to be able to have the time to grieve and not have to worry about paying phone bills.
Well, I think it's the age of the kids too. You mentioned emerging adulthood, which is such an academic term, Brenda.
I know.
So emerging adulthood is 18 to around 30. My children are emerging adults as well. Like they're establishing their households right now. They aren't going to know how to close down mine. No. Like they're just not ready yet. Yeah. I was the power of attorney and the executor at the age of 35 and I was able to handle it. But also I think part of it's just being a Gen Xer, like we'll do whatever.
We'll just do whatever. Yeah.
Below the age of 35, it would be very challenging. And I think really once you're 40 and above, you really are ready to, you don't want to, but you have the skill set to settle an estate. In your 20s and early 30s, I mean, you're still trying to figure out how this #adulting thing works. You're not really thinking a lot about people who are passing or power of healthcare or whatever. I mean, sometimes it happens that way and it needs to be that way. So I almost feel like in this midlife, 50 to probably 70 or whatever, I'm going to go to siblings and cousins. And then once I'm 70 to 80, then you're going to go to children and,
Yeah.
But we're running out of people to put on the list, which is why, as we were talking about this on my podcast, one of my employees said she's going to settle 7 estates. And I was like, 7? She said, yeah, both of our parents are divorced and remarried. And I was like, holy cow. That's when I started doing the math. And I was like, oh, Greg and I are both the oldest. We're going to do at least 5. Like I had never thought about it that way.
Yeah. Well, and also like some of our parents have also remarried. And so then it's like, in my case, it's like, yeah, they've remarried, and those new spouses, they're not new
Yep.
anymore, but step
Right.
parents don't have children. So it's like, does it default to me? Like, it's just like, just
Right.
getting
You don't know.
explicit. So I think that's my other sort of line of questioning is like, how do we have these conversations? Let's just talk about like, we're the adult children. We haven't had this conversation yet with our parents. We really have no idea what's in their filing system, where they have all this information. It's not like something that we sit down and talk about at the family dinner on Sunday night. How do we broach this topic? It's a sensitive topic too, because as you mentioned, I don't want to invade your privacy. I don't need to know what's in your bank account. But, how do we approach that sensitivity?
Yeah, I'll tell you, this one employee, she went to those 7 parents and she was like, hi, here's my medical and my financial binder. Where would I find the same information for you? And they were like, we don't have it. She's like, great, I bought it for you. And then 6 weeks later, they all had them filled out. I was like, I do not know how you did that. My mom doesn't have it filled out. My mother-in-law doesn't have, like, they've all been given the binders. They didn't do it. So I'm just being honest. I can't even get my own family members to do it. It's kind of like I have a launch binder also, which is for emerging adults. And a lot of our audience was saying, how do you get your kids to do the binder? I was like, oh, the kids don't do the binder. I did the binder. And they go to the binder to find the information. So at least it's separated out from mine. So, I mean, if you have parents that are like, especially if they're proactive and they're private and they like to be in charge of their stuff, you don't have to see the binder. Just have them fill it out.
Yeah.
But for me, because my family is not going to do the binder, I know it's like a Mad Libs for adults. I know the scavenger hunt that I'm going to need to go on, and I know where to find it. So for your financial binder, you're going to have 50% that's on the computer, that's in the bank or in the banking apps. You're going to need a lot of passwords, and 50% will be in your file cabinet. For the health binder, you have nothing. There is no paperwork in that house that's going to help you with the health binder. 50% of what you need is in your parents' head. Or your head for your own financial, like, did they have chicken pox? What did they ever, like all this medical history that you also could use just for yourself.
For your own, yeah. Because doctors always ask that. Do you have like medical history, that's available? And it's like, I don't know about some of these things. Yeah.
And then it's digitally on all of the service providers that they have. So for example, my actual doctor today in 2024 does not have digitized medical records. He had to give me a physical copy of it, and I had to pay for it because he just doesn't digitize it. I was like, isn't this a law? They're like, yeah, you just have to pay a penalty. So he doesn't do it. I know, right? So do you know? And also, like, hospitals and doctors and pharmacies are all owned by different companies. Yeah, and they share some information, but not all. Yeah. So like in Cincinnati, if you're part of the University of Cincinnati Healthcare, it's awesome. Or Cincinnati Children's, awesome. Everything shares between everybody. But if you're in some of these other networks in Cincinnati, nothing shares with anybody. So if you can find out what network your parents are in, if it's one that shares and it's all going to be on a My Chart, you're going to have an easier time of it. If they go to 3 different specialists and they still have their, doctor from a different city and they use a different hospital, like, you're not going to have the information that you're going to want when you need it. And they should list you inside of each of those organizations as the person who has access to your healthcare.
These are all really,
even if you have power of healthcare and it's not listed on that doctor's office, they may not give it to you.
They may not give it to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is all really great tips, because I think that some of this information you shared with us, either one, we haven't even thought about yet. It's not on our radar. Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, the sort of perfect storm that's going to start happening. And you just have to put yourself in that position. Like, okay, like even if I look at my own life right now, I'm midlife, I run my business, my emerging adults are going on with their life. If something was to happen in that little nucleus that I've formed, like I can pretty much sort of deal with that. But now it's like, going to something that's sort of like unknown, it could just tip the scales in other areas. And so it's just, I think, it's just something to be kind of aware of right now. If you have no insight into how your parents are managing their life, and if something was to happen today, do you have that white space in your calendar to deal with it, where now this is like this new project on your plate? Or could you get ahead of it by, I think, some of the steps and some of the tools that you've just mentioned, that, you may not have 100% of the information, but could you get 25%? Could you get 65%? Would that just make things a little bit easier? Even if your parents don't reveal everything to you?
Yeah, I know my grandmother was very organized. She was German. She had everything organized. She's like, this is what's going to happen for my end of life celebration. When my parents got divorced, she actually made me the executor. And so she took me up to the bank and she actually put me on her bank accounts. And the banker was like, you do realize she can withdraw all of your money tomorrow. My grandma was like, yep. Because if you are listed on your family members' bank accounts, then literally you don't even have to have any kind of paperwork to get in there. I'm not suggesting that everyone do this. I'm just saying that that's how proactive and planned her generation was. So she was the silent generation. That is the generation that is currently in the nursing homes. They're 100 to around 82 to 100 years old. That's the silent generation. They didn't grow up with all the industry that we had. They created organizational systems in their homes. They were secretaries. They understood file cabinets. We don't understand any of that. And so they planned things that way. Baby boomers did not. Like, they were used to, there were so many of them that their parents just kind of told them what to do. And the whole world has really revolved around baby boomers and has changed as baby boomers have gone through. And then, like I said, Gen X is very, very small. So baby boomers, they're just now retiring. A lot of them haven't even retired yet.
I know.
They're very, very young when you really think about it. The oldest ones are 78. That's not very old.
Right.
But this is going to be more of a conversation. They are going to start realizing, oh, we need to tell the kids, and they still think of us as the kids, some information, even though we're like running the companies and things like that. And like you said, you own a business. Many of us own businesses, you know, and then there's that's a whole nother ball of wax.
Well, yeah. And so it's like, can you afford the time? Because you're talking about 18 months at best if you've got maybe an organized system. But if you have to be doing all this like rabbit holes and digging through boxes to try and find some things, depending on how organized your parents are, it could take you longer. Do you have that time to take away from your business? Because that could mean you taking your eye off like lead generation or connecting with clients or building out other offers, like other products or services. But now you can't because you're doing this side project, being the executive of your parents' estate. So
yeah, but I'm thinking about the businesses also have to get settled.
Oh, yeah. Oh, your parents' businesses. Yeah. Oh, I have no idea what's in there.
Yeah, it's very rude. Like, the world does not stop spinning on its axis when you have to deal with this. 12 to 18 months is about the average, whether it's organized or disorganized. It's how you feel as you go through the process. The time will be the same. It's just, do you feel harried and scattered and like you can't breathe? Or do you feel like, okay, I've got a lot on my plate, but I'm going to segment it and do this, and this. Like, you have kind of a system for it.
Right. Yeah. So we've talked about ways that we can do this. We've talked about like the storm, like things to anticipate. You've shared some of the tools. Where can people find these tools that you offer your clients?
So the company's called Organize 365, and I have a podcast called Organize 365. We sell these binders already made, so you can just fill them out. But also I published a book called The Paper Solution, and explains how to make those binders and more.
Okay, awesome. And on your podcast, you talked about you've brought on people like your sister, you've brought on like accountants, wealth practitioners. Like, what would we find on your podcast that would be helpful?
Actually, I haven't had accountants or wealth practitioners
on my
podcast. That's okay. It's a solo podcast. I've done it every Friday for 10 years. And then about 6 years ago, I started sharing client success stories on Wednesdays. So it's 2 episodes per week. And then sometimes I add in more. Because I have a lot of stuff. Here's the thing, Brenda. Every single one of us has had to create from scratch our operational systems at home. There is no playbook for running a household. And that's why I'm getting my PhD, is because I think there should be. There should be operational systems that you can plug and play in your household, just like you can as you're starting your own business and things like that.
So, and even operational systems that at different stages of life, as what we sort of talked a little bit earlier, like it looks very different for an emerging adult versus someone who is now midlife and children are leaving the house, but you've got aging parents that are coming through. So
the same systems used differently. So like in business, you're going to have operations, sales, marketing, and finance. Same thing at home. You're going to have like a weekly planning, a quarterly planning, a household organization, and information management. How you use those systems will change in different phases of life, just like how you use sales, marketing, finance, and operations changes in business based on the kind of business you have. But the same systems are used in all phases of life.
I love it. What's one question that I didn't ask you that I should have?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I'm not going to, I just respond to questions. I don't come up with new ones.
Well, here's another one for you. What's one thing that drives or, I guess, inspires you to do what you do in your work? Like, you're going after your PhD to obviously give more back to your clients and help them out in organizing 365 in their life and in their businesses. But what's like one of those things that really like inspires you or drives you every day?
I think two things. The first one is I know that women are doing more work at home, invisible work, unpaid work at home. I've heard that in the narrative a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I hear that portrayed in the media, I don't like it. It makes me feel like as a woman, I'm powerless and I am not capable of, or whatever. And also that my husband is a slug and he just doesn't do enough.
Right.
So I am trying to change the narrative in that our household is a business. 68% of the US GDP is household spending. We are the largest small business in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we don't treat our households like businesses. They should be operationalized. The work should be mostly eliminated as opposed to done perfectly. I'd like functional, organized houses with less work instead of Pinterest perfect with more work, so that everybody has time to do what they're uniquely created to do. And the two pictures that I'd like to leave you with is the first, there's no man in my life that has held me back from my goals. If anything, my father, my son works at our company, my husband have all supported me chasing my dreams. And here in Cincinnati, any man I have told about anything I'm doing in business, they will hold the door open for me and then say, and by the way, when you're ready, there are a couple more doors I'd like to open for you that you don't know you need yet. And the second one is, as I was doing in-home organizing in Cincinnati, before I started my online organizing, I organized hundreds of women. And I got this image that women are caged inside of their homes. So many women that I organized felt they did not have the permission, or they explicitly did not have the permission, to leave their houses until their homework was done, until their house was perfectly organized. And so they were holding themselves back from sharing their unique gift with the world because they were trying to get their house perfect. And so I want women to do less at home and just have functional organizing. And I want us to love the men that are around us and see how much they are supporting us. I just think we should be doing less work. And in order to do less work, you just need to systematize it and operationalize it, just like we do in every single other entity there is, in school and government and work. And like we systematize and operationalize. And then at home, we set unrealistic expectations and we put it on one person. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, and one person, and when there's, well, you mentioned it. We could either eliminate things, we could outsource things. We think creatively all the time in businesses and corporations.
Right.
Like, we do this all the time. How do we take some of those strategies, those skills, those tactics, and just put them into the workplace, or sorry, into the home place? I always think about that too, as far as communication. Like, the number one reason why marriages fail is like communication. And it's like, well, but we get trained in communication all the time in our corporate jobs. Right. Why don't we take some of those same principles, like Stephen Covey, like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and just put that into our home life, raising our children, having relationships with our parents, whatever those things are. So I love some of those, you just make it simple that way, right? Versus we're making it more complicated. Where can people find you?
Organize365.com or Organize365 on Instagram, or I'm Lisa Woodruff on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. One last question for you, Lisa, as we sign off. If I was to give you a billboard and you could put anything on it and put it anywhere in the world, what would it say and where would you put it?
I would say you are enough, and you could put it anywhere. You could put it everywhere.
Everywhere. Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much for being on today.
Thank you.